I checked into the Cecil Hotel on a random Tuesday. A high floor, a small room, and a bustling city outside. But inside, time seemed stuck. Elevators stopped where they shouldn't. Voices called my name from the next room. And an entire floor didn't exist. At least not on paper. What you are about to hear is what I experienced. And perhaps you will never look at a hotel the same way again. Put on your headphones and prepare yourself. When I got off the bus at downtown Los Angeles station, the heat hit me hard. It was almost 4 in the afternoon on a random Tuesday, and all I wanted was to take a shower and lie down. The trip from Phoenix had been long, and the smell of the cabin still seemed stuck to my skin. I chose the Hotel Cecil because it was cheap and relatively close to downtown. I didn't care about comfort. I just needed a place to rest for 2 days before continuing my journey to San Francisco. The building's facade was old, with architectural details that had clearly seen better days. Some windows were permanently boarded up from the inside. Others had heavy, dirty curtains hanging haphazardly. The sign above the entrance simply read Hotel Cecil, with worn letters that barely gleamed under the streetlights. The entrance had a strange atmosphere. Not exactly hostile, but there was a kind of dry silence, frozen in time. The glass doors creaked when I opened them, revealing a dark lobby covered in a stained brown carpet. The floor was old marble, full of cracks covered with adhesive tape in some places. The chandeliers hanging from the ceiling seemed too big for the space. It was as if they had been there since the 1930s, and no one had had the courage to remove them. At the counter, a receptionist watched me approach. Thin, with pale skin and a very tight gray dress shirt at the collar. He didn't smile, nor did he say anything when I got closer. He just waited. Simple room. 2 nights, I said, letting my backpack rest on the counter. He typed something into an old computer with a greenish screen. His eyes didn't blink. The sound of the keys was the only noise in the lobby. After a few seconds, he pulled out a paper form and wrote something with a blue ink pen. He handed me a metal key attached to a wooden keychain with the number 1432 carved by hand. Top floor, he finally said. Elevator at the back. Avoid the stairs. I nodded, even though I found the last recommendation strange. I took the key, hoisted my backpack, and headed towards the corridor leading to the elevators. I passed 2 armchairs occupied by silent guests. A very thin man with hands covered in dark spots was leafing through an outdated newspaper. The woman next to him had her eyes closed, but her lips moved as if she were whispering something to herself. I didn't want to listen. The elevator was stopped on the ground floor, with the doors ajar. I had to pull them hard to get inside. Inside, the button seemed to have been replaced several times. The numbers were misplaced, irregularly glued. I pressed the button for the 14th floor. The light flickered before coming on, and the cabin jerked upwards. When the door opened, a long, dimly lit corridor stretched before me. The carpet was the same as in the lobby, but up here, it looked even more worn. The weak lamps created pockets of shadow between one door and another. No sound, no movement. Just the low hum of electricity. I walked slowly to the end of the corridor. Looking for door 1432, I found it in the right corner, in front of a wall where the wallpaper was torn, revealing concrete underneath. The key turned with difficulty. When I finally entered, the room seemed larger than I expected, but not at all inviting. There was an old spring bed with thin sheets and low pillows. A desk against the wall supported a crooked lamp. In the corner, a grimy armchair shared space with an unplugged mini-fridge. The television was a CRT, with manual buttons and a broken antenna. I leaned my backpack at the foot of the bed, opened the window, and took a deep breath. The air inside was denser, as if carrying the memory of everything that had ever happened in that room. Outside, the city stretched as far as the eye could see, but from up here, it seemed distant, unreal, like a scale model. I turned on the bathroom light. The lamp flickered before stabilizing. I washed my face with cold water. The mirror was cracked in the upper left corner, and the sink drain made a strange noise, as if something was slowly moving underneath. I ignored it. I was too tired to entertain paranoia. I went back to the room and lay down for a few minutes. The mattress creaked with every movement, but I managed to relax. I closed my eyes just to rest, but dozed off without realizing it. I woke up some time later to a muffled sound. I looked around without knowing exactly where I was, until I remembered it wasn't my home, nor just any hotel room. I was at the Cecil. The light outside had diminished considerably, and the sky behind the curtains looked orange. It must have been early evening. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the trip still clinging to my body. The room was silent, but there was something strange about that silence, as if it wasn't completely empty. I got up and went to the door. I looked through the peephole, just out of instinct, and saw the empty corridor. Everything was the same, but for some reason, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was out of place, but I couldn't name it yet. I went back inside and turned on the television. Static. No channels worked, just static and a distorted black and white image that flickered. After trying for a few seconds, I gave up. I decided to go out to eat something. I took the elevator down to the ground floor. The receptionist was still there, in the same position, with the same expression. There was something strange about how still he remained, as if he had been placed there to appear human. I went out onto the street and walked 2 blocks until I found a simple restaurant. I ordered a hamburger and a soda. I ate slowly, observing the city's movement and trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling the hotel had left in me. I returned around 9 in the evening. The lobby was darker than before, even with the lights on. I walked straight past the receptionist without saying anything. He didn't look at me, but I had the distinct impression that he knew exactly when I would return. I waited for the elevator. The display took a while to light up. When the door opened, the cabin was empty, but it smelled of old cigarette smoke, as if someone had left seconds earlier. I got in, pressed the button for the 14th floor. The light came on, then went off and came on again. The elevator started to rise slowly and stopped on 2 floors before mine. The doors opened by themselves, but no one got in. The hallway was dark. It closed and continued rising. I reached my floor. The corridor seemed even more silent than the first time. I walked to the room, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching me from behind. I locked the door. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and lay down immediately afterward. My body wanted rest, but my mind seemed restless. Even lying down with my eyes closed, something in me remained alert, as if the hotel was breathing around me. I started to hear noises from outside, slow footsteps in the corridor. They weren't constant. They came and went as if someone was pacing back and forth, waiting. I got up and went to the door, looked through the peephole. Nothing. Empty corridor. I went back to bed, but couldn't sleep. Now the sounds came from the ceiling, heavy creaks, as if someone was walking on the floor above. But if I was on the top floor, where were those steps coming from? I felt a discomfort grow in my stomach, a slight nausea that prevented me from ignoring it. I tried to turn on the television again. It turned on by itself to the same black and white image I had seen before. But now there was a background sound, something like dripping water at a continuous rhythm. The image flickered. I watched for a while until it turned off by itself. I didn't try to turn it on again. I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet on the carpet. The sound from the ceiling stopped. Then, I heard something knock on the wall to the right, like a light tap, repeated 3 times. It was in the direction of room 1434. I approached the wall and put my ear to it, but all I heard was a very faint hiss, as if someone was breathing very close to the wall. I moved away. I decided to try to sleep, even against my body's will. I lay on my side, pulled the sheet up to my chest, and closed my eyes. The sound from the ceiling returned, but now it seemed to come from a more specific point, directly above the bed. I thought about moving, but I didn't want to get up. I kept my eyes closed. I ignored it. I took a deep breath. I remained still until exhaustion overcame me. I woke up again to a metallic sound, as if something had fallen inside the room. I sat up with a jump, looking for what had fallen, but nothing was out of place. The silence seemed even denser now. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights remained steady, but there was something unsettling about how still they seemed, as if time outside was frozen. I went back to bed. I sat there for minutes, looking into the darkness in front of me. The lamplight flickered slightly, as if it had difficulty maintaining stability. With each flicker, shadows shifted on the room's walls. I saw my reflection in the wardrobe mirror, and for an instant, I was sure it wasn't moving exactly like me. I approached slowly, observing every detail, trying to convince myself it was just the effect of the lighting. But my reflection took a fraction of a second longer to repeat my movements. An almost imperceptible delay, but enough to make me step back. I turned my face away, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. The room was cold, although the air conditioning was off. The cold seemed to come from the floor, rising up my legs like dampness. I lay down once more, this time covering my face. With the sheet, there was no noise at all now. No footsteps, no knocking, just that compressed silence that made my ears ache. It took me a long time to fall asleep. The mattress creaked every time I moved. The street light leaked through the curtain gaps. I lay motionless for long minutes until sleep pulled me under again. And this time, I plunged into a strange state. I didn't know if I was sleeping or awake. It was like floating inside my own body without control. I didn't dream, but I felt. I felt as if someone was sitting at the foot of the bed, motionless, watching. I didn't dare open my eyes. There was no touch, no sound, but the presence was clear, undeniable, like a weight. In the darkness of the room, I remained like this, caught between sleep and fear, until everything finally dissolved into unconsciousness. It was still early morning when I woke up again. I wasn't sure what time it was, but the sky outside was dark, and the only light in the room came from the small display of the digital clock next to the bed. The lights flickered, as if there was some electrical fault. I didn't remember touching that clock before, but now it showed 3:11. The numbers seemed to flash slowly, almost rhythmically, like a breath. I sat up slowly, my body heavy and my thoughts clouded. A sound echoed down the corridor outside. Footsteps. Not fast, not loud, just slow and intermittent. The same kind of footsteps I thought I had heard when I tried to sleep. I got up without turning on the light and went to the door. The carpet muffled my steps, but the creak of the wood under the floor seemed to betray every movement. I looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty again, but this time the silence seemed denser, as if something was out of sight, waiting. The noise stopped. I remained there for a few minutes, staring at the emptiness on the other side of the door. When I finally turned to go back, I heard a noise at the end of the corridor, the sound of the elevator. I squinted and saw in the distance the display light up and the numbers rising. 10, 11, 12. I moved away from the door and stood in the middle of the room, waiting for the sound of its arrival. But it never came. The elevator didn't stop on my floor. The display light, visible for a glimpse through the crack in the door, simply went out. I walked to the window and looked out. No cars passed, no city sounds came from the streets. It was as if everything had stopped, as if I were in a suspended space out of time. I lay back down, but the mattress seemed stiffer now, as if someone had tampered with it. The still-off TV reflected a pale glow from the outside light. I kept looking at that blank screen, and for a second, I had the distinct impression that someone was breathing inside it. I didn't approach it. Not this time. The sound returned. Now it came from the floor above. Once again, footsteps. But if I was on the top floor, where were they coming from? I positioned myself directly beneath the area from where the noises seemed to come and listened carefully. It wasn't just footsteps. It was as if something was being dragged, wood perhaps, or something heavy, something that resisted. The sound lasted a few seconds and then suddenly stopped. A dull thud echoed on the wall 3 times. The same sequence of 3 knocks that had echoed hours earlier, as if marked in the very silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and remained there, staring at the door, waiting. An uncomfortable silence filled everything. I wasn't tired, but I didn't feel awake either. Something in that place seemed to consume time differently. When I looked at the digital clock again, it still read 3:11, as if time hadn't advanced a single second. I got up once more, this time with determined steps. I carefully opened the room door and peeked into the corridor. Empty, silent. The lights were on, but something about them seemed worn out, as if they hadn't been changed in a long time. The paint on the walls was starting to peel in some places, and the smell in the air was of old mold, mixed with something metallic, like damp rust. I walked slowly, barefoot, feeling the cold, rough carpet under my feet. I passed room 1434. The door was locked, of course. But through the gap between the doorframe and the floor, I noticed a faint line of light, yellowish, flickering. I bent down to try to hear something. No sound, absolutely nothing. As if there was nothing but emptiness inside. I returned to my room. As soon as the door closed behind me, I heard the elevator sound again, this time closer, clearer. I rushed to the peephole and looked. The display light climbed slowly. 11, 12, 13, but it never reached my floor. It disappeared again. The cabin vanished before the 14th, as if avoiding reaching me. That didn't make sense. I slowly moved away. Suddenly, a noise cracked in the corner of the room. The television turned on by itself. No image, just a gray background with interference. The sound was low, but constant, like static mixed with running water. Before I could approach, it turned off. A dry click cutting through the air. I approached the outlet. It was unplugged. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, trying to find some logic to it. Maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe my mind was reacting to the strange environment, to the isolation, to the morbid architecture of the place. Then I heard something coming from the bathroom, the distinct sound of a drop falling. I got up and went there. The faucet was dry, no leaks. The sound continued. I looked at the ceiling. Nothing. At the floor, dry. And yet, every few seconds, I heard that imaginary drip. I started to wonder if it was external, if it came from another room, if someone, somewhere was doing it on purpose. I went back to the room and threw myself on the bed. Now, I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something in there with me. Something that wasn't observing me with eyes, but with time, as if it was waiting for me to lower my guard, to sleep, to accept. But I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until the clock light flickered one more time and finally changed to 3:12. I tried to ignore it all, to convince myself that it was just accumulated exhaustion, perhaps a psychological reflection of the hotel's oppressive environment. But it was no use. The discomfort wasn't just physical. It was as if something had infiltrated the atmosphere of the place, an invisible weight, as if the very air carried memories that weren't mine. Something that was out of place, and it wasn't just aesthetic or structural. It was deeper. When the clock finally struck 4:01, I got up, determined to go to the front desk. I wanted to ask if anyone else had complained about noises or power outages. I grabbed my jacket, but before opening the door, something made me stop. A low, continuous sound began to vibrate. I didn't know where it came from, but it seemed to come from inside the walls. A hum, almost like an old engine sputtering. I opened the door cautiously. The corridor was different. The light seemed dimmer, and a fine mist, perhaps suspended dust, danced in the air. There were no elevator noises, no footsteps, just the muffled sound of the city far in the distance. I walked slowly, trying to figure out if it was my imagination or if the environment had truly changed. I passed room 1434 again. The light under the door had disappeared. Now everything was dark inside. The doorknob was slightly wet, as if someone had just released it seconds before. I quickened my pace and pressed the elevator button. The display light came on -8. Then it went up to 9, 10, 11, and then stopped. The light flickered. It receded to 10, and then it completely vanished. No sound, no mechanical vibration. It was as if the elevator had ceased to exist. The button remained lit, but there was no response. I decided to take the stairs. I had no idea where they were exactly, so I followed the faded signs on the walls. I found the emergency door and pushed it open. The staircase was old, dimly lit, with stained steps and a strong smell of expired disinfectant. I started to descend, but on the third flight, I heard something below, a faint sound. Something dragging across the concrete. I stopped and stood. Still, the noise ceased. I continued to descend cautiously, and as I approached the 9th floor, I saw something that made me stop again. The stairwell light had burned out right there, leaving the entire landing enveloped in a greenish gloom. There were marks on the floor, wet footprints going back and forth from the corridor. Bare footprints, too small to be mine. I stepped back and the sound returned, no longer below me. Now it came from above, climbing the steps. Light footsteps, almost childish. I didn't dare look. I ran back to the 14th floor, pushed the door open, and returned to the corridor. When I slammed the emergency door shut, I realized the corridor was now completely empty. No sound, no light under the doors. Everything seemed frozen in time. I returned to room 1432. When I entered, the room was dark. I had left the light on. And the strangest thing, the bedspread was folded as if someone had prepared the room for a new arrival. The remote control was on the pillow, and next to it, a key. Not mine. An old key with a metal tag, 1434. I stood there, holding my breath, trying to understand what that key meant. I hadn't left the room long enough for someone to enter and place it there. The hotel didn't seem to have enough guests for this kind of mistake. And even if it were a staff member, why would they leave a key to room 1434 on my pillow? I cautiously picked up the key. It was cold, heavier than I imagined. The metal was slightly oxidized at the edges, and the tag had deep scratch marks, as if someone had tried to erase it. I placed it on the desk and looked at the remote control again. The television was off, but there was something strange in the screen's reflection. A brief silhouette, which disappeared the instant I approached. I turned on the TV just to break the silence. The sound went straight to interference, with black and white bands vibrating across the screen. And there, amidst the distortion, there seemed to be a face. Not very clear, but something in the shape of the eyes and the contour of the cheeks froze me. I turned it off immediately. The entire room fell silent again. Then, a dry noise came from the bathroom. Something fell. I rushed there. Nothing was out of place. Except for the mirror. Its surface was fogged, as if someone had just taken a shower there. I wiped my hand across it, but instead of seeing my reflection, for an instant, I saw a corridor. The same one in the hotel, but empty. And in the background, someone standing still. Very still, very small. When I blinked, everything returned to normal. Only my face, pale and confused. I returned to the room. The key was still there. I decided I would go to room 1434 in the morning. Maybe it was just an absurd coincidence. Maybe not. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing there was something, or someone, trying to lead me to a specific place within that hotel. And for the first time, I began to wonder if that impromptu reservation hadn't been a bigger mistake than I could have imagined. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The city lights were still there, but something seemed to separate them from me, as if I were in a parallel place where time and sound obeyed other rules. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was no longer sure if I wanted to stay there until the end of my reservation. Then, the phone rang. That made me jump. It was the room's landline, the one I hadn't even noticed since I arrived. I looked at it as if it were a relic from another century. I answered with trembling hands, "Don't open the door." That's all they said. The line went dead. I stood there with the phone glued to my ear, trying to understand if that had been real. The voice was female, young, and very, very close. As if she were whispering right into my ear, I slowly put down the phone. The clock now read 4:58. Dawn was only a few hours away, but I didn't know if I would make it through them, not that night. I woke up to the muffled sound of crying. It was low, intermittent, coming from the wall next to me. It wasn't an alarm, nor plumbing, nor something that could be easily ignored. It was human. A contained lament, as if someone was trying to hold back their own despair. I sat up in bed with a jump, my heart racing, my eyes still adjusting to the room's dimness. The curtain was slightly open, letting in the opaque light of dawn. I went straight from the bed to the wall bordering the next room. Room 1434. I pressed my ear against it and stood there, motionless, breathing as slowly as possible. The crying was still there. Sometimes it gained strength, sometimes it seemed to quiet, for instance, as if the person was trying to compose themselves. But it always came back. It wasn't an old sound, nor a distant echo. It was now, present, alive. I moved away slowly. I remembered the key left on the desk. It was still there. I went to it, touched the cold metal and hesitated. Thinking about opening that door was almost like crossing a boundary. But before that, I decided to call the reception. The phone remained there still, as if it had never been touched. I dialed 0. It rang 3 times, then silence. I put the phone back on the hook and went to the room door. I opened it slowly and looked into the corridor. Completely empty, as if nothing had changed since I arrived. I walked to 1434. The key in my hand trembled slightly. I took a deep breath and inserted it into the lock. It turned easily, as if it had been waiting. I turned the doorknob. The door opened a few centimeters. A gust of cold air escaped the room, mixed with the old smell of damp wood and mold. I called out softly. No one answered. I pushed the door further. The interior was plunged into a static gloom. The corridor light barely penetrated the threshold. I stepped inside. The room was structurally identical to mine, but it seemed not to have been used for decades. Accumulated dust, furniture covered by white sheets, and a much lower temperature than the corridor. There were marks on the floor, small intertwined footprints, as if someone had walked in circles. I closed the door behind me. I went to the window. The curtains were closed, but I could see that the view was the same as my room. Or it should have been, because what I saw there seemed like a distorted version of the city. The lights seemed more distant, blurred, as if there was a fog covering everything, and the urban sounds were muffled. I turned to the room. In the center of the bed was an old cloth handkerchief with dark stains I didn't dare identify. And there, on the pillow, something was written. Just 2 words, "Listen to me." At that exact moment, the crying started again, not in the room next door, not from the other side of the wall. Inside that room, they're with me. And the sound came. From the bathroom. I approached the bathroom with slow steps, the floor creaking under my feet. The door was ajar, revealing a narrow gap of darkness and chipped tiles. I reached out and gently pushed. The door opened silently. The bathroom was partially lit by the faint light from the corridor, which entered from behind me, casting my long shadow on the stained floor. In the right corner, the shower stall was closed with a yellowish curtain. The sound of crying came from there, a low, irregular lament. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The sound was wet, muffled, as if the voice was swallowed by water or silence. My instinct screamed for me to get out of there, but my feet wouldn't obey, as if some force was pushing me forward. I touched the curtain with my fingertips. It was damp. The viscous sensation of the fabric, permeated by time and abandonment, sent a shiver down my spine. I slowly pulled it open. There was nothing behind. Nothing but a clogged drain, grime on the walls, and a dark puddle on the floor. But the crying, it was still there. It echoed in the room, even with the shower stall empty. I looked around, trying to understand where it was really coming from. That's when I realized the sound wasn't exactly physical. It vibrated inside my head, as if it passed through the walls and lodged directly in my ears. I recoiled, gasping, stumbling backward and almost hitting the sink. The mirror above it was completely fogged, as if someone had just taken a hot shower, but the entire room was cold as a basement. I rubbed my hand on the glass. A blur passed behind my reflection. I turned sharply. No one. I left the bathroom, now dominated by a silent urgency. Something didn't want me to be there. Or perhaps it wanted exactly that. When I reached the room door, it was closed. I didn't remember closing it. I turned the doorknob. Locked. I pushed. Nothing. I took 2 steps back, trying to understand. Then, the television turned on by itself. The dry sound filled the room, as if an old program was playing. But it wasn't a channel. It was a black and white recording, images of a corridor. That corridor, the one on the 14th floor, empty, static, until a figure appeared in the corner of the screen, still, watching, so distant that it was impossible to define its face. The screen flickered. The figure was closer. I blinked. Closer still. In a few seconds, it was in front of the lens. A female face, young, with fixed, dark eyes. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, abruptly, the image disappeared. Black screen. The key I was holding slipped from my hand and fell to the floor with a metallic clink. At the same instant, the door behind me opened by itself. Without a single sound, just the slight creak of the hinge. The corridor stared at me from the other side, dark and cold. I slowly stepped out, without looking back. I didn't dare lock the door. I left the key right there, on the floor. When I got back to room 1432, my hands were shaking. I closed the door tightly, turned the lock, and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock blinked 5:41. I tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination. Fatigue, a waking nightmare. But something inside me already knew. The hotel wasn't just poorly maintained or full of stories. It was alive. And room 1434 was just the first layer. I tried to sleep after that, but it was useless. The room seemed to absorb any sense of security. I stayed in bed, eyes open, listening to the silence transform into something denser. A presence. A breath that wasn't mine. The early morning dragged on like a waking nightmare, until finally a pale light began to invade the room through the curtain's gap. I got up with heavy bones, as if I hadn't rested for a minute. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and stared at myself in the mirror. There were deep, dark circles under my eyes and a slight tremor in my hands. Everything that happened with room 1434 seemed like a confused dream, but the key was no longer on the desk. The television was off, and the stained handkerchief was nowhere to be found. The only indication that all of that truly happened was the ingrained smell of mold and the persistent feeling that someone was watching me. I decided I needed to leave the room. I went down the floors by the stairs, avoiding the elevator, but the entire hotel seemed to have plunged into a kind of vacuum. No guests in the corridors, no voices. The reception was empty, no staff behind the counter. The newspapers piled there bore the date of the previous day, as if time had stopped. I returned to the 14th floor in the morning. I needed to see with my own eyes if that room really existed, if I had entered it, or if it was all just a hallucination induced by fatigue. I walked to the door of 1434. There was no longer a number on the wood, just circular marks as if someone had forcibly ripped off the plaque. I tried to turn the doorknob, locked, no sign of the key. No noise inside. I backed away, feeling a chill run up my spine. I returned to my room, where I finally decided I wouldn't wait another night. I would leave before the scheduled time. I was about to call the front desk or try to call a ride-sharing car when the TV turned on by itself again. This time without sound. The image was static. The door of 1434, filmed from a fixed angle like a security camera. Then the doorknob started to turn. Someone was on the other side, but the door wouldn't open. Just the persistent, almost rhythmic movement, as if the person had forgotten how to open a door. After a few seconds, the image disappeared. Black. Screen. And in the reflection again, a silhouette appeared behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. My breathing accelerated. My heartbeat seemed out of sync with real time. I grabbed my bag, threw everything that was out back into it, and decided to leave for good. But when I opened the room door, I was startled. A woman was standing in front of the door to 1434. She was young. Her skin was very pale, like porcelain. She wore an old blue dress, closed black shoes, and her straight hair looked wet. She looked directly at me, as if she were waiting for me. Her eyes were expressionless, no judgment, no anger, but also no human warmth. I took a step back, but before I could say anything, she vanished. She didn't run. She didn't enter any room. She simply ceased to be there. And when I looked at the floor, I noticed wet footprints on the carpet, leading from my room to 1434. I slowly closed the door and leaned against it. My mind was spinning, trying to find some logic, any explanation. Could all of this be some kind of act? A themed hotel? But there was nothing on the website, no mention. And no one would put on such a silent private show with so many details, just for one guest. I sat on the bed with my suitcase still open beside me. My reservation ended the next day. I just wanted to hold out until morning. See the sunrise, call a car, leave and never come back. But something inside me knew the hotel wouldn't let me. With trembling hands, I got up once more and went to the room door. I looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty. No sign of movement, no footsteps, no shadows. Just that thick silence the hotel seemed to emanate in the early morning. When I turned to close the lock, I noticed that the room's wall mirror was fogged up again. There was no reason. I hadn't showered, nor was there any vapor in the air. I approached slowly, and there on the fogged glass, words slowly appeared, drawing themselves as if an invisible finger were writing them. They were short, shaky letters like anxious scribbles. Don't ignore. The message remained there for a few seconds before disappearing as if it had never existed. The surface became clean, cold, still again. I sat on the bed, unsure whether I should flee or obey. Something in that place didn't want to be forgotten. Something wanted to be heard, seen, recognized, and perhaps feared. The room clock blinked 6:17 when I decided I couldn't just wait. After the message in the mirror and the inexplicable apparitions, something inside me began to corrode any attempt to rationalize. I needed to understand what was happening in that place. More than fear, it was the sensation that, if I didn't discover it, I would never leave. I remembered a detail the receptionist mentioned at check-in. The highest floor available is the 14th. At the time, I didn't realize it, but now it sounded strange. Available, not existing. And when I first used the elevator, I remember that the number 14 didn't even light up like the others, as if it wasn't an option. I left room 1432 with the same suitcase leaning against the wall and my shoulders heavy with fatigue. The corridor was quiet, but the air had a different smell. A faint odor of stagnant water mixed with rust. I went to the end of the corridor where the elevator was. I pressed the button. The display slowly descended to my floor, but something caught my attention. The floors flickered on the outside panel, except for 14. I entered the cabin. The internal lights were dim, and the side mirrors returned my reflection with a slight delay, as if they weren't just glass, but something else. The buttons went up to the 15th. I pressed the 15th, but kept my eyes fixed on the display. The elevator began to ascend, and I counted each number: 12, 13, 15. The 14 simply didn't exist there. But the moment we passed 13, I felt a slight vibration, as if the cabin had decelerated for an instant, as if it was hesitating. I waited for the elevator to stop on the 15th, and upon exiting, looked around. The floor was different. Modern, new paint, clean carpet, generic pictures on the walls. It looked like another hotel. I began to descend the emergency stairs calmly, step by step, attentive to any sign between the floors. It was between the 15th and 13th that I noticed something unusual. A small landing between the two floors, as if it were a mid-floor. And there, hidden between two flights of stairs, a narrow metal door dot. It had no number, only rust marks and old, streaky paint. It looked like a maintenance entrance. The doorknob was low, almost touching the frame, as if it had been forced many times. I tried to turn it. The door yielded with a dry creak, revealing a dark corridor behind it. At first, I thought I was entering a storage room, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw that it was a corridor identical to the other floors. Same carpet, same pattern of doors, but something was wrong, very wrong. Lights flickered in the background, and the air was thicker. I could feel the dust at the back of my throat. The walls had dark stains, and there were marks on the baseboards, as if something had been dragged along. I walked slowly. The doors had numbering: 1430, 1431, 1432. My room, it was there. But how? I touched the doorknob of door 1432, locked. I turned the one for 1433. It opened easily. The room was exactly like mine, but everything seemed stagnant. The bedspread covered in dust, the bedside lamp on, trembling slightly. The television showed static. There was no reflection in the mirror, as if it had been replaced by a dark, opaque glass. I went back to the corridor. I continued walking to the end, passing by each door. In one of them, 1436, I heard something. A heavy breath, low, rhythmic. It didn't sound like an appliance nor wind. Someone was behind that door. I backed away without making a sound. At the bend in the corridor, further ahead, I saw something that paralyzed me. A shadow cast on the wall. Long, feminine, still. It was as if the light was being blocked by someone I still couldn't see. But the silhouette was there. Static, not breathing, not moving. I held my breath and hid behind a protrusion in the wall, hoping it would disappear. The shadow didn't move. When I mustered the courage and looked again, there was nothing there. The corridor was now completely empty. I moved forward, trying to keep my steps light. but the carpet seemed to amplify every movement. I passed door 1437 and noticed it was ajar. Something about it made me stop. A sweet, cloying aroma escaped from inside. I couldn't identify it immediately, but it reminded me of very old flowers kept in a damp place for too long. I pushed the door open cautiously. The corridor's light was enough for me to see inside. There was a rocking chair facing the window, and on it, a carefully folded blue dress. No one was there, but the atmosphere seemed suspended in time. The TV was on silent, showing images of a busy street, not a live broadcast, but an old recording, perhaps from the 90s. I took 2 steps inside and went to the window. Outside, the city seemed the same as always, but there was something wrong with the sky. The clouds moved strangely, as if they were distorted reflections on a liquid surface. I stepped away, slowly closing the door. Back in the corridor, I looked. Behind me, nothing, no sound, no light, just the same heavy, viscous silence. And then, for the first time since I entered that floor, I heard something that completely froze me, the stairwell door closing by itself behind me. I was no longer alone. My first impulse was to run, but my legs wouldn't immediately obey. There was something in the air, a kind of pressure that made even breathing difficult. It wasn't just fear. It was a sensation of being watched, evaluated, as if my mere presence on that floor had activated something that didn't want to be found. I went back to the iron door through which I had entered, but it was now completely closed. I tried to turn the doorknob, push with my shoulder, knock, nothing, locked from the inside. There was no visible lock, just the uncomfortable feeling that it should never be opened again. I took a deep breath and walked back down the corridor. The lighting seemed even weaker, and with each new step, the lamps above me flickered as if my movement drained the energy from the place. I passed the doors again and noticed that many were now ajar. Before, they had all been closed. One by one, the rooms revealed themselves like capsules frozen in time. Unmade beds, open suitcases, clothes on chairs. In one of them, there was an old stereo playing a soft, scratchy melody of some 50s song. I turned it off and the sound stopped immediately. But when I closed the door, I heard the same music start again behind me. By this point, the corridor seemed to grow longer and longer, as if it were extending itself. I kept walking until, turning a corner I didn't remember being there before, I saw a door different from the others. It wasn't numbered. It was taller, narrower, with carvings in the wood, geometric shapes, almost symbols. It had the appearance of something ancient, even older than the hotel. I approached slowly. When I touched the doorknob, a shiver ran through my entire arm. I turned, and the door creaked as it opened, revealing a small room, dimly lit by a single lamp hanging from the ceiling. In the center, there was a desk, and on it, an old registration card, yellowed with time. I approached to read. At the top, the name written by hand, Eliza Lamb. My heart pounded. I knew that name. I remembered headlines, videos, a poorly explained tragedy in that very hotel. But how could that card be there, in that hidden room, on this ghost floor? Suddenly, the lamp above me began to flicker. The sound of the chain swinging reverberated off the walls. And then, the card flew off the table, as if ripped away by an invisible force. I darted out of the room, back into the corridor, where all the doors were now wide open. Televisions were on different channels, distorted noises, muffled screams, childish laughter. I ran down the corridor as if fleeing the very memory of the place. I rounded the corner and came face to face with the fire escape. I climbed without thinking, step by step, ignoring the heavy legs, the burning in my chest. The elevator, at that point, was no longer an option. And as I climbed, I noticed something strange. All the emergency exit lights were off. Only darkness, the sound of my footsteps, and from time to time, a persistent dripping that seemed to come from the ceiling. I climbed 2 more flights until I reached a metal door. It was the exit to the rooftop. It should have been locked, but it wasn't. The doorknob turned easily, as if someone had just passed through there. I opened it cautiously. The air outside was strange, colder than it should be, biting, still. The city below seemed too distant, like a model, as if I were observing something that was no longer real. In the right corner of the rooftop, the large water tanks rose like silent sentinels. Those tanks, that's where they found Elisa's body. I approached slowly. The sound of water dripping was still audible. A stream dripped from the top of one of the reservoirs, creating a dark puddle on the concrete floor. And there, right next to the tank, I saw it again. The silhouette of the woman in the blue dress. She was facing away. Her long, straight hair looked wet, plastered to her back. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. But something in me told me she knew I was there. One false step and she would turn. And I didn't want to see her face. I backed away slowly, but the wet floor gave way under my foot and a dry thud echoed. At that instant, she turned. Her eyes had no sparkle, only emptiness, as if she were a materialized memory, soulless. Her mouth moved slightly, but no sound came out, and yet I understood. She didn't want to be forgotten. I turned and ran back to the terrace door, scrambling down the steps in desperation, trying to find my way back to my room or any place that seemed safe. But now the floors were different. The hotel had changed. Or perhaps it was I who was in another place. My feet barely touched the steps as I rushed down the stairs. The image of that woman next to the tank, or whatever that was, remained, etched in my mind like a burning iron. As I stepped back through the 14th floor door, I found myself again in that muffled corridor, covered in shadows and full of locked doors. But something was different. The air was heavier, denser, as if that floor had been sealed with all the memories that should have disappeared with it. I went back the same way I had come, but the landmarks had changed. Some doors that were open before were now closed. Others, which were numbered before, were clean, without any identification. It was as if that corridor was reconfiguring itself, reacting to my presence. I passed the room where I had found the registration card. The hanging lamp still flickered slightly, and the chair was overturned on the floor, as if knocked down by an energy burst. But the card was no longer there. Not under the table, nor in the corners of the room. Gone, in its place. A new detail caught my attention. A word, written with a finger in the accumulated dust on the wood. Stay. That was a warning, or a threat. I left there and headed towards the stairs, but a new idea struck me. What if I was indeed being led? Every step I took seemed to be part of something larger, as if that presence, whatever it was drawing a path for me. And even if I tried to retreat, it pushed me forward. Upon reaching the stairs, I decided to go down. But on the first flight of steps, I noticed something dripping down the walls. Water. A thin, constant trickle coming from above, from the terrace, or from one of the tanks. The staircase seemed longer than before. It went down, and the floors didn't pass. The numbers on the emergency doors had disappeared. There was no reference, just concrete and the sound of dripping water. Until finally, after what seemed like endless minutes, I reached the ground floor. But it wasn't the same lobby I had entered on the first day. This one was old, much older. The paint on the walls peeled in large chunks, revealing layers of different colors, as if decades had overlapped. The armchairs were covered in yellowed sheets, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. But the clock behind the counter was working. It read 3:14. Behind the reception desk, I saw registration cards piled in cardboard boxes. Many of them old, typewritten. I rummaged through some, guided by an impulse I didn't fully understand. I was looking for something. Some proof that all of this was real, or at least some explanation. And then, among time-stained papers, I found a new card. White paper, fresh ink. Name, Eliza Lamb. Date, unfilled. Check-in time, unregistered. A sound cut through the silence. It came from the revolving door at the entrance. I hid behind the counter and peeked through a crack. She was there again, the woman in the blue dress. Only this time she was inside. Her skin seemed paler, almost translucent, and her eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see. She slowly floated through the lobby without touching the floor, like a loose memory drifting in a forgotten place. She floated to the center of the hall and stopped in front of one of the sheet-covered armchairs. She looked at it, as if expecting someone who was late. The silence around her was almost absolute, interrupted only by a sudden creak of the floorboards. From where I was, I could barely breathe. Every cell in my body begged me not to make a sound, not to exist at that moment. The figure tilted her head slightly, as if she had heard my thoughts. Her eyes began to move, scanning the environment in my direction. Slowly, I closed my eyes, by instinct, as if that could protect me. A thought crossed my mind: if I don't see, she doesn't see. Then either, ridiculous, but it was all I had. When I opened my eyes again, she had vanished. The hall was empty, and the light coming through the stained glass windows was slightly different, darker, as if time outside had accelerated. I carefully emerged from behind the counter. There was something on the floor, exactly where she had been standing, a drop of water. And next to it, a continuous line that led to a side door, as if someone or something had left a trail. Without thinking twice, I decided to follow that trail. The wet trail on the old wooden floor extended beyond the lobby side door. And something in me, a mix of intuition and despair, made me go through it. The creak of the hinge echoed down a narrow, windowless corridor, lit by flickering yellow lamps. The air there was even colder, and each step seemed to reverberate like a muffled scream on the damp walls. I walked slowly, following the trail that seemed fresh. It wasn't just water. As I advanced, I noticed darker stains on the floor, as if what was dripping was mixed with something thick, almost viscous. The corridor seemed endless, as if the hotel was folding in on itself, and at its end, an unmarked metal door. Upon touching it, I felt the icy surface against my skin. There was a subtle vibration, like the low sound of a frequency barely heard, but felt by the entire body. I turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. The room beyond was small, windowless, lit only by a single flickering fluorescent tube. In the center, an old porcelain bathtub, filled to the brim with dark water. And above it, a rusty pipe dripped slowly. Drip, drip. I approached. The water's surface was so reflective that I could almost see my own reflection. But it wasn't my face I saw. It was hers, Eliza, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly ajar, motionless beneath the surface. I recoiled, stumbling over a metal bucket next to the bathtub. The metallic clang echoed loudly, and the light flickered twice before going out completely. I stood motionless in the dark for seconds that felt like hours, until the light returned. The bathtub was empty, no water, no body. Just the dry, cracked surface, and on it, a handprint. I stumbled out of the room, my heart pounding. I wanted to get out of that floor, out of the hotel, out of the city, but something in me also wanted to understand. Why was all of this happening to me? Why me? I didn't know Eliza. I had never been involved with the case. I wasn't obsessed with horror stories. I just wanted to rest. I returned to the main corridor and noticed something even stranger. The walls now had portraits. Old frames, covered in dust, but the images inside them were recent. One showed the hotel lobby exactly as I saw it when I entered. Another, the 14th floor staircase. and a third showed me standing in front of the registration card. The same scene, the same angle, with the photos being taken as I was living through it. I looked back at the rest of the corridor. There were more portraits, and in all of them, scenes from the last few hours. Me climbing the emergency stairs, me opening the terrace door, me in front of the water tank, and in the background of each image her, Elisa, like an out-of-focus reflection, present in every moment. I started to back away, my breath catching. The paintings weren't just recording, they were showing me something. And in the last one, the most recent, my reflection stared directly back at me. Only there was something wrong. The me in the photo wasn't wearing the same clothes. My face was paler, my eyes slightly darkened, and water was dripping from my chin. I let out a muffled scream and ran down the corridor. I passed through the side door again and returned to the abandoned lobby. The natural light had vanished. It was dark, as if night had fallen all at once. There was no sign of an exit. The revolving door was locked, motionless. The windows seemed covered by a dense layer of soot. I heard the sound of the elevator again. I instinctively returned to the elevator hall. The light on the display oscillated between 2 floors without stopping on any. But then, without me pressing any button, the door opened with a harsh sound. It was empty, the internal mirror cracked, the walls stained, and in the lower right corner, in small letters, almost scratched into the metallic surface, "You've been here before." I went in, I don't know why. Perhaps out of fear of staying on that floor. Perhaps because there was no choice left. The door closed. The buttons all glowed at the same time, and the elevator began to ascend on its own. It went up to the 14th. Then it stopped. The door opened. And there was my corridor. The 14th floor. Again, but it wasn't the same. Now all the doors were open. The lights flickered frantically. And there were people in the rooms, or shadows, or echoes, all sitting, all still, all looking at me. And at the end of the corridor, in front of door 1432, her waiting for me. The corridor before me seemed to dissolve any notion of time or logic. Each step towards my room door, or what should have been room 1432, required effort, as if the air had become dense, viscous. Each open door along the corridor revealed rooms stagnant in time, with furniture covered by sheets and beds made as if waiting for guests who never arrived. But what disturbed me most were the eyes of those presences. Faceless, bodiless, just patterns of presence observing me with a silent intensity. I reached the door. My hands trembled as I touched the doorknob. There was still a label, with the number 1432, but the paint seemed to have been corroded by decades. I slowly turned and pushed the door open. The room was as I remembered it, the unmade bed, the television still with its red standby light on, the suitcase thrown in a corner, but the window was open. And the wind coming through it wasn't the same as the city's. It was a cold, sterile, almost mechanical wind, as if it came from a place where time didn't circulate. I moved back inside, feeling an urgency I couldn't explain. As if something was about to happen, or perhaps it was already happening. I opened the corridor door and stepped out again. This time, instead of trying to leave the building, I turned towards the emergency stairs. The only place where there was still enough silence to think. I slowly climbed the first few flights. Each step creaked, each wall exhaled dampness. The concrete seemed to breathe under my feet. When I reached the 10th floor, I noticed that the numbering disappeared. The panel on the wall that once indicated 14 was now blank. I continued climbing, driven not by courage, but by the absence of choice. The last flight of stairs ended in an iron door, worn, with its edges corroded by rust. I tested the doorknob. It turned. It was unlocked. Upon opening the door, I was swallowed by a white indifferent light. The terrace. The contrast between the dimness of the interior and the brightness of the terrace blinded me for an instant. I blinked several times until I could distinguish the shapes. The sky was overcast, a uniform gray that seemed to weigh upon the buildings. No sound, no birds, not even the wind. Everything was still, untouched, unreal. The terrace floor was uneven, cracked in several places, with mold stains in the corners and dark trails leading to the water tanks. There were 4 of them, large, cylindrical, covered with metal lids. One of them was open. The upper hatch only showed the liquid darkness within. A smell of rust and chlorine permeated the air. I approached slowly. On the way, I passed a metallic object forgotten on the ground, a kind of maintenance wrench, rusty. I picked it up without thinking. It was damp cold. As I approached the open tank, an uncomfortable feeling grew in my stomach, as if I was about to witness something I didn't want, something that could change everything. I stopped beside the tank. I looked inside. Dark, but there was something there. A low sound, like water moving slowly, and then a reflection, a movement. For a second, I saw eyes opening beneath the surface. 2 black eyes fixed on me, instinctive recoil. My heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I took a few steps back. The tank hatch then closed by itself. The lid fell with a dry thud that reverberated across the entire terrace. I turned, ready to run back, but something stopped me. The door through which I had entered was now closed, and there was no doorknob on the outside. I went to it. I knocked. I screamed. No response. Only the muffled sound of the still city below. I looked around. The terrace was surrounded by high railings, but at one end there was an external iron ladder attached to the concrete, leading to a structure above, perhaps technical access to the top of the tanks. I climbed. Each step trembled under my weight, and the metal vibrated in an almost living way. Upon reaching the top, I noticed something unexpected. A worn wooden door, as if it had been torn from an old cabinet and glued there. In the center of it, the word "again," written with a dirty finger in shaky letters. I hesitated before the door marked with "again." That word pulsed in the back of my mind like a familiar echo, as if I had been through this before. I pushed the wood with the palm of my hand and felt the soft resistance, as if the very air was trying to prevent my entry. The hinge creaked, revealing a narrow, dark compartment, lit only by a faint light coming from a window too high to reach. The interior was a kind of abandoned maintenance room, with old electrical panels and exposed pipes. But in the center, contrasting with the rest of the environment, there was a seemingly new brown leather armchair. On it, a portable radio. It was on. A constant hiss filled the space, interspersed with almost human noises like heavy breathing trying to hold back. I approached and turned off the radio. The silence that followed was brutal. But then, something caught my attention on the opposite wall. Behind a fallen painting, there was a trapdoor. Square, iron, with a lever. I pulled it. The floor trembled slightly and the trapdoor opened downwards, revealing a vertical ladder that descended into what appeared to be the inside of one of the water tanks. An open hatch, absolute darkness inside. A strong smell of mold, chlorine, and rust hit me like a wave. Why would I go down? I still ask myself that today. But at that moment, descending seemed inevitable. I went down. Each step sounded muffled. Upon reaching the interior of the tank, I realized that it was much wider inside than it seemed from the outside. The floor was metallic, wet, with a faint lamp hanging from a makeshift wire. In the center, there was a kind of altar made of old objects, burnt dolls, pieces of mirror, black and white photographs of faded faces, and at the top of the altar, a recent photograph. Mine. In the image, I was lying in my bed in room 1432, sleeping. I approached the photo. The wet floor seemed to give way under my feet, as if the tank itself was pulling me in. I started to back away, but the light flickered and went out. Absolute darkness swallowed me. I stood motionless in the dark for seconds that seemed like hours, trying to understand if what surrounded me was silence or something worse. A low, almost imperceptible sound began to emerge from the darkness, dripping rhythmically, like a broken faucet, but mixed with something deeper, almost a whispered voice on another frequency. It didn't speak a language I knew, but the sound spoke to me. I took 2 steps back and hit the metal ladder. It was now cold as ice. I climbed the first step, then the second, and then something moved at the bottom of the tank. A splash. Slow dragging. I looked over my shoulder and saw the glint of 2 eyes again. They were different from the ones I saw on the terrace. These were closer, more human, or almost human. The ladder light began to flicker again. Quickly, I climbed the last steps and pushed the hatch open forcefully. I threw myself out of the trapdoor, closing it with a metallic thud. The radio had turned itself back on. Now an old song played, distorted, as if it were a recording from the 40s. The singer's voice vibrated in falsetto, in a melancholic tone, repeating the same endless verses. "Where are you, darling? I'm still waiting. I'm still. I went down the ladder back to the terrace. The city below now looked different, the lights weaker, some streets completely dark. The sky had darkened more than usual, and the moon, if it was indeed the moon, had a crooked outline. Something about it seemed corrupted. I ran to the iron door of the terrace, hoping it had unlocked. When I touched the doorknob, it turned by itself and slowly opened, revealing the internal staircase again. I descended 2 steps at a time, my heart still racing. When I reached the 14th floor corridor, I no longer found open doors, nor portraits, nor signs of presences. Only room 1432. I entered. The television was on, tuned to a static channel. I went to the bed and sat down. My feet were wet, my hands trembling. I looked at the wall opposite the bed and saw, drawn on the paint with something dark and irregular, a single number. 2, as if someone wanted to remind me. This was the second day, and it wasn't over yet. I woke up with a dry throat, as if I had spent hours trying to scream in a soundless nightmare. The room was shrouded in gloom. The television was off, the bedside lamp overturned on the floor. The curtain, previously closed, now trembled slightly with a breeze that shouldn't exist. I looked at the digital clock on the dresser to 3:11 a.m., the same time the sounds had started the day before. But at that moment, the silence was absolute. I got up slowly, feeling my joints ache as if I had aged years during sleep. My clothes clung to my body from the humidity. There was something in the air, a strange, subtle, yet cloying smell. I reached for the light switch and turned it on, or at least tried to. The lamp flickered a few times, resisted, and then went out completely. Only the warm dimness from the street entered through the window. That's when I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the door. Dry, calculated. As if someone knew exactly what to do to awaken the worst kind of fear. Silence broken by anticipation. I stood paralyzed, staring at the room door. The doorknob didn't move. No voice called out, just the sound, and then nothing else. I crossed the room in short, contained steps. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. I opened it cautiously. The corridor was completely dark. No light on the ceiling, no sound, nothing. Only a faint glow coming from the far end, perhaps from the staircase. I took a step outside, leaving the door ajar. The corridor, once ordinary, now seemed narrower, as if the building had contracted during the night. And then, the door to room 1434 opened by itself. Slowly, silently, a dark void within. I waited to see someone emerge. A face. A fleeting shadow. Anything. But what I saw was what I didn't see. A gloom so thick it seemed to absorb the corridors. Light. Suddenly something fell to the floor in front of me. A metallic sound. A keyring. I bent down and picking it up, recognized it. It was the key to room 1434, the number engraved on an oval old brass plate. My fingers trembled as I held it. Then the door to 1434 closed by itself, with a dry click that echoed throughout the floor. I went back inside my room and closed the door, trying to breathe more calmly. The key was still in my hand. I left it on the dresser and went to the bathroom to wash my face. The water from the faucet gushed out cold, smelling of rust. I stared at myself in the mirror, but for a brief second, my reflection didn't follow my movement. It was a minimal delay, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I recoiled 2 steps. The bathroom light flickered once, and when it returned to normal, the mirror was covered in watermarks, as if someone had run wet fingers over it from the inside out. 1 vertical line, 2, 3, slowly forming the word stay. I left the bathroom without looking back. The key to room 1434 was still on the dresser. I picked it up again, and even against every rational instinct, I walked to the corridor. Everything was darker, narrower, as if the hotel was closing its entrails around me. I reached the door. I touched the wood. Cold, almost alive. I took a deep breath and turned the key in the lock. The click was dry. I pushed the door open and entered. Room 1434 was different. It didn't look like an unoccupied room. It was as if someone still lived there. There were clothes hanging, an open suitcase in the corner, used shoes beside the bed. The window was wide open, and torn curtains fluttered with the cold wind coming in. In the center of the room, on the bed, was an old portable tape recorder. Like those used in interrogations in the 80s, the red light was on. When I approached, it started playing. The voice was female. Nobody believes me. I've talked to them. They said it's just fatigue. But I know what I saw. I know he watches me at night. The tank, I heard voices inside. It was Eliza Lamb's voice. I stopped the recording, my hands sweating and a shiver running down my back. Then I noticed a door at the back of the room, one that didn't exist in the other rooms. A bathroom with old tiles, but with a huge, deep bathtub filled to the brim. I got closer. The water was still clean, but so dark that it reflected nothing. There was something at the bottom, a silhouette. When I leaned over the edge, the surface trembled slightly, as if something had moved. And then suddenly, a hand emerged from the water. I instinctively pulled back, stumbling and falling to the floor, but there was no hand. The bathtub was empty, and the recorder's voice had started playing again, even without anyone pressing play. They will hear you too. They know you're here. I stumbled out of room 1434, unable to understand how something as mundane as a recording could affect me so much. I slammed the door shut behind me, but the sound it made didn't seem real. It echoed as if underwater. Everything on that floor seemed distorted now. The air, the sound, even the light. As if I were in a parallel version of the hotel, created just to confuse me. I leaned against the wall as I went back to my room. But when I looked at the number on the door, it was 1436. I took 2 steps back. I didn't remember passing so many doors. I looked at the corridor. 1432 was no longer there. Neither was 1434. I quickened my pace, trying to find some familiar reference. The end of the corridor was now a dead end, with an exposed brick wall. This had never been there before. I touched the wall, solid, uneven, real. My heart started beating faster. I went back the way I came, but the door numbers were all wrong. Illogical sequences. 1440, 1427, 1439, 1421. As if the corridor itself was scrambling my perception. The only consistent thing was the silence, and the sound of my breathing growing heavier. I opened a random door, desperate. It was a storage room. At least it seemed to be. Shelves with towels, sheets, cleaning products. But there was something. On the floor, leaning against the corner. A black suitcase, identical to mine, I approached. It was mine. The padlock was broken and the lid ajar. Inside, my clothes, my passport, my cell phone, everything I had stored there. The suitcase that was in room 1432, but I wasn't in room 1432. I ran out of there. I turned the corner and bumped into someone. It was the receptionist, but different. He was in uniform, as on the day I arrived, but now his eyes were deep, empty, as if lacking a soul. He just held out his hand, and in it, the key to my room. Without saying a word, I took the key with a trembling hand. When I looked back, the corridor was back to normal. Door 1432 in its usual place. The world seemed to have returned to normal. But not for long. I entered the room without understanding how something as simple as a key could restore order. I slowly closed the door. The room was as I remembered it, but at the same time it wasn't. The armchair had moved. The bedspread was different. There was a small mirror hanging on the wall that I swear wasn't there before. I approached the mirror. It reflected nothing, not my image. Not the room, nothing. The surface was like black painted glass. I touched it, cold, and then a crack formed right in the center, expanding like a web. I recoiled, but there was no burst, no shards. Only the sound like cracking ice. The room phone rang. 3 times. I approached with hesitation, picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. Silence. And then, a breath on the other end of the line. Slow, steady, human. I stopped breathing to listen better. The sound on the phone was my own breathing, deep. Mirrored, but it was delayed. As if there was someone, somewhere, breathing just like me. A second later, imitating me. I hung up the phone. I went to the bed and sat down, trying to think. I needed to get out of there. I needed dawn to break. But the digital clock now read 3:11 a.m. Again, the same time as before, but hours had already passed. This didn't make sense. I went to the window, opened the curtain. The city was dark. No streetlights, no headlights, no movement. Like a model, like a memory. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I needed to keep control. But then I heard a new sound, footsteps in the corridor. Fast, irregular, as if someone was running in circles. I looked through the peephole. The corridor was dark, but I could see a silhouette moving from side to side. A woman, long hair, dark clothes. She stopped in front of door 1434. She knocked 3 times. Then she turned her face towards me. Even in the dark, I knew she was looking directly into the peephole. She smiled and whispered something I didn't hear but understood. She knew I was there. The corridor light flickered, and for an instant, she vanished. But the sound continued. The knocks repeated, now on my door. 3, severe, almost gentle. I backed away. I locked the door. I prayed it was just a delusion from exhaustion. But from the other side, she whispered again, "Open it," with a voice. That was mine. The day broke before I realized it. The light that invaded the room was not announced by a gradual sunrise, but by a sudden and silent explosion of clarity through the curtain's cracks, as if someone had turned on a giant lamp. Outside, I looked at the clock. 6:17 a.m. For the first time in hours or days, time seemed to have started running again. The phone was silent, the television off, the window closed. The room apparently normal, but inside me, nothing was in place. I sat on the bed, trying to understand if what I had lived through was a delusion, a nightmare, or something that truly happened. The floor was still cold. Yesterday's clothes still damp with sweat. The suitcase, my suitcase, was beside the door, closed. intact, as if it had never been opened. I got up, my legs trembled. I picked up my cell phone and tried to check. The time, no signal, no data, just the static time. 6:17 a.m. I locked my suitcase, took a deep breath, and left the room. The corridor was empty, but bathed in a faint light that seemed to come from nowhere. I walked towards the elevator, trying not to look at room 1434, but it was impossible not to feel its presence there, like a poorly healed wound. I pressed the button. The door opened immediately. I entered. The cabin, this time, seemed different, newer, without the usual creaks, without the hum of the ceiling lamp. I pressed the ground floor button and waited. The descent began, regular, stable, but as the numbers faded on the display, -14, 13, 12, I felt a shiver run up my spine. When it reached floor 7, the cabin stopped. No sound of doors opening, it just stopped. The display was off. I looked around. The side mirror perfectly reflected the cabin's interior, but the reflection was not simultaneous. When I raised my hand, my image reacted with a delay, an exact delay, as if it were recorded, a loop. My reflection blinked its eyes before me. I lowered my hand. I turned my back to it. Then the door opened, but not to the 7th floor corridor. It was a dark space, empty, like a basement, or a basement from a dream. I didn't get out. I waited. And the doors closed again without anyone entering. The elevator started moving again. The display relit. 654. The ground floor appeared without warning. The door opened with a dry sound like a held breath. And there was the lobby, silent, motionless, like an old photograph. The reception desk empty, the chairs in the same place, but with a slight accumulation of dust that hadn't been there before. I crossed the space with restrained steps. Each step made the floor creak as if the building registered my departure. The receptionist wasn't there. The room key was still on the counter, next to a registration card with my name, written in a handwriting that wasn't mine. "Are you leaving?" A voice behind me. I turned. It was him, the receptionist, with the same neutral demeanor as the first day, the same ill-fitting tie. But something in his eyes was different now. There was no emptiness. There was memory. "Yes," I replied, almost in a whisper. "My time here is up." He nodded slightly. "We hope you rested well." I didn't reply. I pulled my suitcase and went to the revolving door. The sun outside blinded me for a moment. The noise of the living city invaded my ears forcefully. Honking, footsteps, voices, movement. Everything as it should be. Reality finally catching up to me. The street in front of the Cecil Hotel was busy. People walking quickly, indifferent to that silent building behind me. A building that for 2 days swallowed my sense of logic, my time, my security. I crossed the sidewalk. I took a few steps and turned to look at the hotel one last time. The windows remained closed, opaque, like tired eyes that had seen too much. On the top floor, behind the pale curtain of 1434, a silhouette remained motionless. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. It was just a shadow, or perhaps not. For a second, I felt like I was looking at myself. Not as I am now, but as I was before entering there. As if a part of me had never truly managed to leave. I shook my head, trying to shake off the thought. But, as I took another step, I felt something strange in my jacket pocket. I put my hand in a key. The one to 1432, the same one I had left on the counter before leaving. I closed my hand around it and kept walking. The city's noise filled my ears. People passed beside me. Cars followed their paths. Life was happening. But behind me, in absolute silence, the hotel was still watching me. And somehow I knew it never wanted me to leave. The walk to the station was quieter than it should have been. I walked among people as if I were still inside that building. Everything seemed muffled, as if my ears were still submerged in the hotel's atmosphere. It was like carrying an invisible weight that others didn't see, but that distorted my every step. I took the subway to the airport with my eyes fixed on the window glass, but I couldn't see my reflection. Only the dark background of the tunnel. I tried not to think. I tried not to remember, but my mind betrayed me. Every strange sound in the carriage made me turn my head. Every sudden silence made me clench my fists. At the airport, I waited for my flight like someone waiting for anesthesia. I sat far from everyone, pulled my hood over my eyes and tried to sleep. But every time my eyelids grew heavy, it was as if someone leaned over me. Someone who wasn't there. During the flight, I tried to write down what I had experienced, but no words seemed to make sense. I deleted everything. No one would believe it. I didn't even believe it myself. When I got home, I left my suitcase in the corner of the room and went straight to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was different. Deeper set eyes, paler skin, but there was something beyond the appearance. It was as if the version that returned wasn't exactly the same one that had left. That night I dreamed of room 1432, not of what I lived there, but of what I couldn't see. I woke up sweating, my heart racing, and something was in my clothes. Hand out the key. The same one. Again. But I swore I had left it at the hotel. Or did I? I got up and went to my backpack. I opened all the pockets. I took everything out. No other key. Only that one. I placed it on the table and went to get a glass of water. When I came back, it was no longer there. The front door was locked, and on the floor, near the door, there was a registration card with my name and the date of my arrival. But no departure. Date. I picked up the card with trembling hands. It was yellowed, as if decades old. But the paper was the same as the one I saw on the counter when I arrived. The letters were the same. The signature too, mine, on the back, in uneven, shaky handwriting. There was a phrase written in faded red. It's not you who leaves the hotel. It's the hotel that decides when to let you go. I let the paper fall. Suddenly, the kitchen light flickered. Just once, then it went back to normal. But I already knew it wasn't a coincidence. I went back to the room. I locked the door. I put the key inside a drawer and padlocked it. With every sound coming from the living room, my body stiffened. That key might be with me, but what it represented, that never went away. In the days that followed, I avoided talking about what happened. I refused calls. I refused visits. I just pretended normalcy. But every night was the same thing. At exactly 3:11 a.m., I would wake up and feel the weight of a gaze in the dark. I started sleeping with the lights on, but that didn't stop the dreams. Room 1434 returned every dawn. The corridor, the elevator, the water, always the water, and the voice. That voice, mine, calling. One morning, I couldn't bear it. I went to the drawer, took out the key, and threw it away. I took it to the furthest trash can in the neighborhood and came back without looking back. Immediate relief. As if I had freed myself from something. That night, I slept for the first time without interruptions, but upon waking, it was there. On the nightstand, the key, 1432. It was like a sentence. I finally realized that some doors, even when closed, never truly lock, and that some stays have no checkout. For a long time, I carried that uncomfortable certainty with me, that even having left the hotel, it had not left me. And for weeks, perhaps months, everything around me seemed to echo what I had lived inside there. The key appeared in impossible places. The clock always read 3:11 a.m., and sometimes my own voice whispered my name in the dark. I reached my limit. In the height of despair, I did what I thought was the only way out. I threw the key away. The 1432 one. I no longer wanted to carry it with me, neither physically nor in memory. I cut off any memory that linked me to the hotel. I deleted photos. I erased notes. I distanced myself from everything that reminded me of that trip. And, most importantly, I promised myself, I'll never go back to Los Angeles. Over time, the strange things ceased. The dreams became rarer. The noises vanished, and the dawns became silent again. Slowly, I began to rebuild my routine. It wasn't easy, nor fast, but I managed. I started going out again, working, talking to people. And even though sometimes my mind still tried to betray me with flashes of what I had lived, like the sound of an elevator or water dripping in a gutter, I clung to logic. I kept repeating to myself, it was just in my head. And with time, I started to truly believe it. Today, I'm telling all this not to scare anyone, nor to prove anything, but because, somehow, this is still with me. And putting it into words, perhaps it's my final way of moving on. Whether all this was real or not, it no longer matters so much. Life went on, and I went with it. But just to be safe, if someday someone offers you a cheap stay in downtown Los Angeles, think twice before accepting. Not everything that's cheap is worth the price. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. And if you want more stories like this, click subscribe, hit the bell, and leave your comment below. Who knows, the next story could be yours. Thanks and see you in the next video.